People with famous parent. S. When how did you realize they're a public figure? S. How did it affect you? My boss is a celebrity and her 5-year-old kid is starting to realize something is up. He recently questioned why random people always ask her for photos and my boss told him that people were just being friendly. Since then he started asking people for selfies when he wants to be friendly. It's cute. That's adorable, and asking for selfies to be friendly is also one of the rights of friendship with drunk girls in the club bathroom. My friend is the great whatever AMT of greats, granddaughter of Henry Ford, and she knew from the moment she was able to speak. She has this unspoken superior air around her and she knows she's set for life. She's nice though. Bal in Butt House. Bill Nye is my uncle. And it wasn't really until 3rd grade that it sunk in for me that everyone else thinks it's incredible that they're now only 2 degrees of separation away from someone on TV. That was the year that we started watching his videos for science lessons. And no, I don't really like Save the World. Based on his viral personality, it's easy to see why the original Science Guy show worked. He genuinely loves explaining things. Explaining fundamental scientific ideas to little kids, in humorous and easy to understand ways, made for some great TV. This new show is full of assumptions and inane debating. Like it's trying to get the other side. But he's a good person. If you've heard stories about him being a dong, they're probably true. Strangers can get pretty unbearable sometimes. That's such a weird coincidence. Bill Nye is my uncle too. My dad is famous in the folk music world and every now and then people will stop him to say hi or whatever. I wouldn't call him a celebrity, but he's certainly well known in the scene. He's had a long career and I've been aware of it forever, but it doesn't really affect me too much in general day-to-day life. I have had some really incredible experiences because of it though. My favorite thing by far is reading through the comments on his Facebook page. It could be a super trivial post about shoveling snow or mowing the lawn, and yet without fail, someone will comment there's a song in that. It's hilarious. My father is very well known in his scientific field. I never really thought twice about it as a kid. I got to do lots of cool things, field trips, nature TV shoots, etc. And it was just the norm. I went to a convention with him when I was 21 and he was the keynote speaker, and I realized he was a rock star. Folks just loved meeting him. They brought his books to sign, asked for pics, etc. My dad is super humble and chill, so it was at that point I realized the greatness of my dad. He put his kids, and now his grandkids, on his shoulders so they could see the amazing world he got to experience because of his success. My dad is a famous professional golfer and my godfather is in the Golf Hall of Fame. I spent my entire childhood at golf courses. I was used to people at golf courses and even restaurants coming up to say hi to him, but I didn't really realize he was anything special until I was probably 7 or so. I told my friends I was going to be missing school for a week because I was going with my dad to the UK for the British Open. It wasn't the first time I'd missed school, but I was finally at that age where it actually mattered if I missed school. Nothing really changed since none of my friends cared about golf. I never even learned to play golf, so I stopped spending time at golf courses and it was easy to forget he was anything different. I give golfers of any caliber so much credit. It's very difficult. I once lost 3 balls and 2 golf clubs on a mini golf course. Apparently my boyfriend's uncle is Steve Harris from Iron Maiden, and me being a huge fan of Iron Maiden since I was like 4, I had no freaking clue he has a house in my country and walks around town in pink polos. Once I was walking with my boyfriend and I saw Steve freaking Harris walking across the street and I freaked out, and then my boyfriend told me chill. He is my uncle and calls him to introduce me. We've been dating for 2 years now and I'm still shook at family gatherings, especially my dad because he's also a huge Iron Maiden fanboy. My grandpa is a local news reporter. He's well known in my state. The first time I learned about him, me and my parents were watching the news and my mom told me that was my grandpa. Didn't really affect me then and doesn't really affect me now. except for the occasional hello from complete strangers when I'm out with him. But there was one time when he took me to his job when I was really young and I ran on the set while the weatherman was on. I had to announce that it would be snowing, which never happens here, and to give candy to my neighborhood. I was also really confused because the weatherman was pointing at nothing except a green screen, which I didn't know how it worked. I realized that had nothing to do with my grandpa, but I'm gonna keep it in anyway. That story was the highlight of the post. Not my parent, but my great uncle. Kind of. He's been dating my great aunt for nearly 40 years. He was the lead guitarist for Blondie. It didn't seem like anything big to me until he got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's pretty sweet. I don't see him much, but I've gotten to chill with him a couple of times. I guess I caught on when my parent would get stopped and praised everywhere we went. I didn't understand why until I was about 8 years old or so. My parent is a well-known journalist. It affected me because I don't see my parent as a famous person, more like a fancy scholar, haha. We were at a restaurant when I was a kid and we noticed this family pointing and whispering. Finally, the little boy comes up with a paper and pen and asks for my dad's autograph. He was so nervous and could barely even get the words out. My brother and I looked at each other kind of weird and giggled. That was the first time I realized my parents weren't bullshitting us. We used to get weird phone calls, too, so we finally switched to an unlisted number. It was fans trying to see if it was really actually my dad's house. My dad's only locally famous for football, but in the South, that's no small thing. He's been inducted into 4 different halls of fame, but outside of our state and his home state, he isn't known. The only real way it affected me is when I was in high school or college. I got a lot of, you have to behave, you can't get in trouble, everyone knows your last name, you don't have the luxury of making stupid, young mistakes, everyone will know about it, he wasn't wrong. Oh, and I swear I had guys ask me out simply because of who my dad was. It was always really clear very quickly if they were more interested in him than me. My friend's grandpa sculpted the statue of the Christ in Rio, Brazil. I could not believe it when she told me, but a quick search confirmed it. Apparently it's only one of the many pieces he's created over the years and she seemed pretty casual about it. Pretty impressive thinking your art can let people identify a city or even a country in a split second. If he is still alive, please tell him that my grandfather became a Christian because he saw that statue. He was a wild child flying in the US Air Force after his friend died, and suddenly saw this huge vision of Jesus come into view in his plane. My grandfather passed away last year, but he always wanted to go back to Rio to see that statue. I know the granddaughter of an American political figure you have probably all heard of. She said that she spends some time with her grandparent, but it is very constrained by the grandparent's job. Also, she said that her sister would not write about her relationship to the grandparent to get into college or anything because she did not want an unfair advantage. My friend said that she herself had no such qualms. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Not really my parent. He could be though, but my mom dated Jared Leto before I was born. Also my mom, though she isn't very famous, she was an actress. We finally found Jared Leto's child. Don't know if this counts, but here goes. I've known Stephen Colbert since I was a child because my parents were his neighbors in Greenwich, MA. I didn't know he was anything other than just a normal guy up until somewhere around 8 years old, give or take a couple years. I go to school with his son. Smoked weed with the dude. He's such a weird dude, but he's pretty cool. His band is awesome. My dad is a somewhat famous curler. Used to be annoying because he would stop and talk, or would be asked for autographs and that sort of thing, but it has died down recently. Please tell me your father is the man with the amazing mustache. My mom was one of the 2 final torchbearers and lit the cauldron in the 1976 Montreal Olympics. It was fascinating for me and my friends from grades 1-4, but then kinda died down. Lately my brother has been coming home with his drunk friends and they get absolutely amazed at the shrine we have at the top of our staircase, which includes one of the torches used. My parents, particularly my dad, is a celebrity in Christian church circles. It happened gradually as I grew up. Somewhere in my late teens my name got changed to so and so's daughter. It happened at every church I went to. You look familiar. My parents have thousands of followers on Facebook, many of them pastors of mega churches, and we're always sharing everything. All the pictures. Eventually I would have to fess up why I looked familiar. It became even harder when I had a kid. My parents acted like absolute buttholes and I had to crack down hard on their behavior. Now I wasn't just known, I was a known bad guy. Pretty sure they've told some people my poor husband may be abusing me. He isn't. I just had a kid and realized I couldn't imagine doing the crap they put me through to my child. We finally managed to find a church we fit into, and no one has said anything, but I worry about being recognized. That would suck because they're not just celebrities, they are celebrities with implied morality attached. What a pain in the butt. I hope you can keep flying under the radar in your current church. Not celebrity status, but my father was very influential in the community. I chose the same career and have always just been called by my last name because that's all I am to most people. It's honestly annoying cause I'm not near as good at the job and don't plan on ever getting to that level. Worst part was I failed a drug test and was denied a job. Somebody in that office broke confidentiality laws and called him that day to give him the news. Got a call from my dad scolding me before the clinic even got back to me with the official news. Ended up leaving the country to work because I was tired of living in his shadow. Can't imagine how stressful that life can be for real celebrities where a simple move can't alleviate the issue. Sounds familiar. My father was a political boss. I couldn't make a move without someone reporting on me. I finally moved across the country to get a better sense of self and more privacy. I can't imagine how stressful it would have to be the son-daughter of a big fish in a big pond. No escape. Not me, but I worked with Neil Young's son. When he first told me that I didn't believe him. Then I looked him up and he looks exactly like his dad. He never really talked about his dad. I guess his dad wanted him to live a normal life, which explained why he had worked at a retail store. That's interesting because Neil Young was also the son of somebody famous, so maybe he was really careful about that with his kids. My grandma grew up with was friends with James Dean, and she stayed active in the fan club until she died. She was in a documentary about him, and she loved talking to fans because she just loved people and was so proud of Jimmy and loved being able to talk to people about him. When she passed away, there was a piece about her in their fan club newsletter even. I'm always surprised at the amount of James Dean fans I have who recognize me and approach me and talk to me about my grandma and how much they loved and appreciated her. I love it. My grandma and I were so close. And I think the happiness and warmth I feel talking to them about her must be kind of what she felt like talking to them about Jimmy. And it's just the warmest, coziest thing. It took me a minute to realize you weren't talking about the P-star. My uncle was a drummer in a band for about 20 or so years. He started with this band the year I was born, so basically I spent most of my young life backstage at concerts. It was only until I was about 10 or so when I realized that going backstage wasn't normal for most people. I think the biggest moment of realization was when I was 13 and he was playing a New Year's Eve show in a 21 and over venue. I had to be escorted by a security guard pretty much everywhere I went that night and I got a real taste of star power. It was weird. When my uncle left the band, it wasn't on good terms and he pretty much wants nothing to do with them, and so it's hard, especially at family gatherings, to pretend that that part of his life never happened. He still plays professionally but with a much less high profile group. I still get to hang out backstage when he comes to town, but it's not quite the same as being surrounded by bodyguards to keep me safe from crazy, drunk fans. I know you can't say, but it'd be wild if your uncle was Mike Portnoy. To be honest, I never realized my father was famous until I came to Reddit and mentioned that he had invented peanut butter and graham cracker sandwiches. Get out. A close family friend is a well-known public figure in my area and a lot of people recognize her in public. It feels weird to be at restaurants with her because we always get a small discount or something like that. She's been my mom's best friend since middle school. I've always looked up to her and I'd always get so excited when she'd be on TV and stuff, but now it's just normal. Like, oh hey, there she is. When everyone was staring when I was getting on the train to go to boarding school, my uncle tried to say he was the famous one, but once I got to school everyone knew all about this stuff my dad did 19 years ago. I'm sorry, I don't recognize your life experience as canon. I met a pretty well-known celebrity's daughter about 3 years back at a party in DC. It was very awkward because she seemed pretty normal until my buddy mentioned it to me, and then she felt really uncomfortable and actually went home. I didn't realize, but she later said that she hates when people know cause it usually dominates the conversation. Since most of these comments are by people loosely connected to famous people, I'll throw mine in. My great uncle was Admiral William Bull Halsey, one of 4 men to hold the rank of Fleet Admiral. I'm also a descendant of Johns Hopkins, the namesake of the famous school. LOL, yeah, it's somehow descended into what's your claim to fame. Appreciate it though. Interesting stuff. I was in my 20s when my dad started, but he was on Antiques Roadshow in the US for 15 years. When we still had a shop, people would come in to get their picture with him. Once in a while, we'll be out and someone will stop him. It's weird even at 48. May or may not be relevant, but my father is really close friends with James Maslow, manager, Big Time Rush. As it turns out, we were invited to his manager's Christmas gathering and James was there. Being 14 and absolutely in love with him at that time, I began freaking out until his manager actually introduced him to me. It was the best moment of my life. OMG. 14-year-old me would have freaked out too. I love those guys. Not particularly famous with younger people now, but Chief Dan George is one of my relatives. When I tell anyone this who's over 40 years old, they generally get really awkward about it. I never knew him personally because he died before I was born. I know what he was famous for, and I knew his son really well who recently died. Native people are my father's side of my family, and I grew up my whole life around my extended family on his side who are also all related to him. Whenever it gets out who I'm related to, people like to give me their opinions about native folks, which I find unnecessary. They're my family. That's about it. I also find it awkward when people gush about it, since I've grown up being partially native myself and have had to deal with racism and everyone's negativity about them as a people. Dan George wanted everyone to recognize that it's not easy being native in a white person's world. Even today it's not easy for a lot of my relatives and other ones all across this continent. Little Big Man. Loved that movie. A girl I work with is the daughter of NYC Governor Cuomo and the granddaughter of RFK. She's super down to earth. You can tell she has money because she went to Harvard and buy her clothes. But at this point in her life she seems to not be as impacted by it. At least she doesn't present herself as having been impacted. She's her own self, if that makes sense. My dad was a local middle school teacher that everyone loved. I went to private school. He taught in public. When people found out he was my dad they would flip. He was a cool dude, amazing teacher. I have an uncle, who I knew was important as he was in charge of the Manned Space Center in Houston. I had no idea how important until a few years ago when my sister looked him up and discovered that the ISS would not exist without him. He is known as the most important person in spaceflight, who you never heard of. My dad is pretty famous in classical music in my country, and so is my uncle. In most situations dad's just an average dude, but in some circles absolutely everyone knows who he is. It didn't really happen until we moved here when I was a teenager, so it didn't really affect me. My great uncle, Tony Fontaine, was a famous gospel singer in the 60s 70s. When I realized that he was actually well known enough to still be played on gospel radio I bragged about it every day to my teachers. Except I called him a rock star instead, cause it sounds cooler. I never actually got to meet him though, since he died in the mid 70s. My great grandfather's cousin was Patsy Cline. No one knows, no one cares. Doesn't change how I live my life, but it's not often I get to bring it up. Growing up, one of my best friend's dad was the Honky Tonk Man, a WWE wrestler that was supposed to be an Elvis impersonator. He had tons of masks in his house and he had an arcade game in his house that had him in it. My friend grew up a pretty normal life. Every now and again we would run into someone who knew her dad and would freak out, but I don't think it had too much of an impact on her. In typical Ask Reddit fashion, not me, but I'm good friends with Neil deGrasse Tyson's nephew, or at least I used to be. We're still homies but haven't seen each other in a real long time cause he moved and I'm not on social media as much as I used to be. Last time we hung out was around 2-3 years ago. In his case it's kinda funny because while Neil deGrasse Tyson was always very accomplished, it was relatively recently, within the last 10 or so years that he became actually famous. So it's almost like the family realized that he was famous altogether. Oh, and Bill Nye comes over for Thanksgiving sometimes. They're genuinely good friends. I think that's cool. My old boss was the former US Olympic head cycling mechanic. I'm like a son to him because he has no kids, but I worked for him for about 10 years. It has affected me in all positive ways. I got to know famous cyclists. I have worked on Jeremy Power's bike and have ridden with him a few times. I touched Tom Danielson's bike. I've ridden with Greg LeMond and worked on his bike. I've worked on Kent Bostick's bike as well. I know JP Weigel personally. I also know many industry people which has gotten me a lot of perks and products below wholesale cost. I know a lot of those names are meaningless to the majority of people so take that as you will. I think the best part though is knowing how to work on bikes because I was taught by him. My dad isn't a celebrity, but he's well known in business political circles. Well enough that those connections have landed him, and on occasion, me, in some parties with higher level people like owners of large businesses and politicians. I've even gotten to meet with presidents a couple times as a result. Growing up, I never really stopped to consider it as anything unusual because that's just the way it always was. Get us an invite next time. I went to high school with a girl whose mom is a very famous singer. I remember one time, when other girls in class found out who her mother is, they basically held her hostage and asked thousands of questions. What I got from that convo was that she knows her mother is a world sensation, but for her, she is just her mom. She is proud of her, and happy to go to events with her, but she never shoved it down people's throats that she is her daughter. Says it was very common to come back home and see another celebrity chatting with her mom. My dad would wave to people as we were driving and they would wave to and back at him. As a kid I was impressed that my dad knew so many people. I asked him how he knows them all and he said they are my friends. For a solid year or two I thought my dad must be super famous or something. Then I realized it was just what people in cars do. My aunt by marriage is a famous humorous columnist in her native language, which my family doesn't speak. My uncle is a deadbeat and they were the poor relatives we helped out financially when we visited them in her hometown. It was a pleasant shock. Local businesses gave us special treatment. Some just gave us stuff for free. Everyone knew her and mentioned they liked or disliked her latest controversial column. People would wave on the street, and one restaurant owner even took pictures with her to put up on his wall. She looked and acted like just another lower middle class mom, had a snaggletooth and pinched pennies, and she actually wrote a really popular column everyone in her town read. The sad part was she would not usually go to all the nice places she took us to because she had no money to spend on those things. Not me, but a guy I went to high school with is the son of a well-known sports reporter in Chicago. One time I was in the hallway and he was walking to class with a couple of his buddies, and one of them goes, "Come on, man. Can't your dad get us tickets to the game?" I never knew the guy personally, but I kind of felt bad for him because I had a feeling a lot of the guy's friends were only friends with him because of who his dad was. I wouldn't say my dad is famous, but if you ever watched the annual 9/11 memorial ceremony performed at the Eagle Rock Reservation across from NYC, the bell sound you hear during the ceremony is actually a recording of him hitting a mixing bowl screwed to a wooden dowel in our garage and then tweaking it to sound like a grand bell tower. That's all I got : My best friend's great uncle is Bill Murray and I've met him a few times. He's exactly how you'd expect him to be except more vulgar. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.